Recently, footage surfaced of Savannah Guthrie, one of the most recognized faces in American morning television, in a moment that nobody expected to see. Not on camera. Not like this. It wasn't a breaking news segment. It wasn't a perfectly lit studio interview. It was raw. It was real. And it involved the one person Savannah has always called her anchor, her mother, Nancy. And when people saw it, something shifted. Because for years, Savannah Guthrie has sat behind that Today Show desk with grace, composure, and a smile that millions of Americans wake up to every single morning. She's interviewed presidents. She's covered wars. She's broken news that shook the country. But behind all of that, behind the cameras, the headlines and the applause, there was a story she rarely talked about. A story rooted in loss, in sacrifice, in a kind of love so quiet and so powerful that most people never even knew it existed. And this footage, it cracked that story wide open. By the end of this video, you will understand Savannah Guthrie in a way you never have before. You will see not just the journalist, but the daughter, the woman, and the human being shaped by forces far deeper than fame. Stay with us, because this changes everything. If you turn on NBC's Today Show on any given weekday morning, you will see her. Savannah Guthrie, poised, warm, brilliant. She sits there with that unmistakable combination of intelligence and approachability that very few television personalities ever manage to achieve. She can ask a world leader a question that makes them deeply uncomfortable, and then pivot, in the same breath, to laughing about something completely human and relatable. That's a rare gift. And it didn't come from nowhere. Savannah has been the co-anchor of Today since 2012, making her one of the longest-running and most beloved faces in morning television history. She's a licensed attorney. She served as a White House correspondent. She has moderated presidential town halls and covered some of the most defining news events of the last 2 decades. She is, by every measure, at the absolute top of her field. But here's what makes Savannah's story different from most celebrity stories you'll ever hear. Her success was never handed to her. It was earned in the most difficult way possible, through grief, through instability, through starting over when starting over felt impossible, and through the fierce, unwavering love of a woman named Nancy Guthrie. Her mother. Nancy is not a Hollywood name. She is not a public figure. She does not appear on television. But make no mistake, without Nancy Guthrie, there's no Savannah Guthrie. And the footage that recently surfaced, it proves that in a way that is almost impossible to watch without feeling something deep in your chest. This is the story of Savannah Guthrie, not just the journalist, but the girl who grew up too fast, who lost too much too soon, and who chose every single day to show up anyway. Savannah Clark Guthrie was born on December 27, 1971, in Melbourne, Australia, where her father was working at the time. But the family soon returned to the United States, eventually settling in Tucson, Arizona. Her childhood, on the surface, seemed ordinary enough. She was bright, curious, the kind of kid who read constantly and asked questions that were a little too complicated for her age. But what happened next changed everything. When Savannah was just 16 years old, her father, Charles Guthrie, died suddenly. Let that land for a moment. 16 years old. The age when most kids are worried about school dances and driver's licenses. Savannah was suddenly navigating the kind of loss that would break most adults in half. And her mother, Nancy, was left to raise 3 children alone. Nancy didn't collapse. She didn't disappear into grief, though she would have had every right to. Instead, she made a decision that defined the entire trajectory of Savannah's life. She kept going, she worked. She sacrificed. She made sure that despite the gaping hole left by their father's death, her children would feel stability, love, and the belief that their future was still worth fighting for. Savannah has spoken about this in rare, quiet interviews about watching her mother carry that weight without complaint. About learning from a very young age that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about what you choose to do after you break. That lesson became the foundation of everything Savannah would later become. She threw herself into school, into debate, into the kind of focused ambition that people develop when they understand, early and painfully, that nothing in life is guaranteed. She graduated from the University of Arizona, then went on to earn her law degree from Georgetown University Law Center. A lawyer, a journalist, a woman building herself, brick by careful brick, on the memory of a father she lost far too soon. Few people ever knew this hidden truth about where Savannah's drive truly came from. Now you do. After law school, most people assumed Savannah Guthrie would go into practice as an attorney. She had the degree. She had the mind for it, but something pulled her in a completely different direction. She had always been drawn to storytelling, to the urgency of news, to the idea that information delivered clearly and with honesty could actually change how people understood their world. So she made a decision that surprised everyone around her. She pivoted. She started in local television, working her way through smaller markets, learning the craft from the ground up. She wasn't handed a national platform. She earned every single inch of it through relentless hard work and the kind of tenacity that you only develop when you've already survived something devastating. Her legal background turned out to be not a detour, but a superpower, because Savannah Guthrie could do something most journalists simply couldn't. She could take complex legal situations, political maneuvers and policy details, and explain them in plain, human language that anyone watching at home could understand. That skill got her noticed. In 2008, she joined NBC News as a correspondent. Then came her role as White House correspondent, where she covered the Obama administration with the kind of precision and quiet authority that made Washington insiders stop and pay attention. And then, in 2012, came the moment that changed her life forever. She was named co-anchor of Today, one of the most coveted seats in all of American television. Overnight, Savannah Guthrie went from respected journalist to a face that 60 million Americans recognized. Her face, her voice, her laugh. But what most of those 60 million people didn't know, what the cameras could never show, was the woman sitting at home watching her daughter from a screen in Arizona. Nancy. Watching the little girl she had raised alone. The girl who had lost her father at 16. The girl she had never once stopped believing in. This moment would define their entire relationship in ways neither of them could have fully anticipated. Fame, as it turns out, is not a shield. In 2017, Savannah Guthrie's world at Today was rocked by one of the most significant scandals in morning television history, the firing of her longtime co-host Matt Lauer. The allegations against Lauer were serious, disturbing, and they blindsided the people who had worked alongside him for years. Savannah was one of them. She found out moments before she had to go on air and report the news herself, live in front of millions of people, and she did it, visibly shaken, visibly emotional. But she sat in that chair and she delivered the story with the professionalism and courage that had defined her entire career. It would have broken lesser people, but the personal darkness that hit Savannah hardest wasn't on any front page. Around that same period, she began losing her vision. It started gradually, and then suddenly it was serious. A detached retina, surgery, terrifying uncertainty about whether she would ever see properly again. She was a television journalist. Her career lived in her eyes, reading scripts, looking into cameras, connecting with guests face to face. And she didn't know if she would ever fully recover. Few people knew how close she came to losing everything she had so carefully built. She underwent multiple surgeries. There were mornings when she didn't know if she could get through a broadcast. Mornings when the fear was so loud inside her head that she could barely hear anything else. And through all of it, the scandal at work, the terror about her vision, the relentless pressure of being a public figure during some of the most chaotic news cycles in modern American history. She held on, because that's what Nancy had taught her. You hold on. No matter what, you hold on. Savannah Guthrie has been married twice. Her first marriage to British TV presenter Mark Orchard ended in divorce. It was a painful chapter she has rarely discussed publicly, and that privacy, that deliberate choice to protect her own heartbreak from the cameras, says something important about who she really is. She doesn't perform her pain for the world. Then came Mike Feldman, a political consultant she had known for years before love quietly found its way into their long friendship. They married in 2014, and together they built something beautiful, a family. 2 children, Vale and Charlie. Becoming a mother transformed Savannah in ways she has spoken about with striking, unscripted honesty. She has talked about the guilt that working mothers carry like an invisible weight, about leaving her children to go to work at 4 in the morning while the rest of the world was still asleep, about the milestones she missed, the ordinary moments she wasn't there for, and the constant, exhausting negotiation of trying to be everything to everyone without losing herself completely. But she has also talked about what her children gave her: back purpose, perspective, and a bone-deep understanding of what her own mother had done for her all those years ago, the sacrifices Nancy made so quietly and so completely that Savannah hadn't fully understood them until she became a mother herself. That realization hit her like a wave she hadn't seen coming, because suddenly she wasn't just Savannah Guthrie, journalist and anchor and public figure. She was someone's mother. Someone who would give up absolutely anything to make sure her children felt safe, seen, and loved. Just like Nancy. Time does something interesting to people who have already survived great loss. It doesn't frighten them the same way it frightens everyone else. Savannah Guthrie, now in her early 50s, has spoken with remarkable candor about aging in an industry that has not always been kind to women who grow older visibly and publicly. An industry where youth is currency and where time tends to be treated as an enemy rather than a gift. But Savannah doesn't talk about aging that way. She speaks about it without bitterness, without the performative positivity that sometimes feels like a carefully constructed mask. She talks about growing older the way someone speaks when they have already looked much scarier things directly in the face: the death of a parent, a failing career, a body turning against them, and arrived at the quiet, hard-won conclusion that getting older is actually a privilege, because it is. She has said in her more reflective moments that the question she returns to more than any other is a simple one. Am I doing something that matters? Not, am I still relevant? Not, am I famous enough? Not, do people still know my name? Am I doing something that matters? That question, that standard she holds herself to, didn't arrive from nowhere. It came from watching a woman raise 3 children alone after the worst possible thing happened. It came from understanding in the very marrow of her bones that life is not long enough to spend on things that don't truly count, and it was brought into sharp, vivid focus by something that recently found its way into the world. Something quiet, something real, something that reminded everyone, all at once, what Savannah Guthrie is actually made of. The footage, when people first saw it, many of them weren't sure what they were looking at. It wasn't dramatic in any Hollywood sense of the word. It wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't scandal or breaking news or any of the things the internet usually stops for. It was Savannah Guthrie, off camera with her mother Nancy, caught in a quiet, completely unguarded moment that somehow made its way out into the world. And what stopped people, what made them put down their phones and actually watch, was the way Savannah looked at her mother. Not the way a celebrity looks at a parent at an awards show. Not the polished, camera-aware affection we're all so used to seeing. Like a daughter looking at the person who made her survive. In the footage, Savannah is laughing. Nancy is laughing. They're standing close together, the way people stand when they have been through something together that most people around them will never fully understand. That particular closeness that only comes from shared grief and shared survival. And Savannah says something to her mother quietly, almost privately, as if she's forgotten for a moment that anyone else is watching. That translates in every human language and in every culture on earth to this: you are the reason I am still here. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't staged. It wasn't for the cameras or the ratings or the audience. It was real. And that realness, that completely unfiltered, unperformed love between a daughter and the mother who carried her through the darkest years of her life, cut clean through every piece of armor that people have learned to wear when they consume celebrity content. Because It wasn't celebrity content. It was just two women, a mother and a daughter. A shared history of grief and sacrifice and survival, and the kind of love that never needs to announce itself because it simply never stops. The internet saw it, and the internet felt it because we all have someone like Nancy in our lives, or we desperately wish we did. Someone who held everything together when they had every single reason to fall apart. Someone who never asked for recognition. Someone who never needed applause. Someone who just showed up every morning, without fail, without complaint, because that is what love actually looks like when it's honest and real and completely unglamorous. That is what this footage captured. And that is exactly why it changed everything. Here is what the story of Savannah Guthrie ultimately teaches us if we're willing to sit with it long enough to really hear it. Fame is loud. Fame is visible and celebrated and put on magazine covers. But the things that actually hold us together, the things that keep us standing when standing feels impossible, those things are almost always quiet. They are the mothers who work without recognition, the sacrifices that never make any headline anywhere, the lessons passed down not in speeches or graduation ceremonies, but in the simple, daily act of someone choosing to keep going. When keeping going feels like the hardest thing in the world. Savannah Guthrie is one of the most accomplished journalists in American television history. She has interviewed the powerful. She has reported stories that move the nation. She has sat in that chair on live television, in front of tens of millions of people, through personal crisis, professional devastation, and genuine physical fear. And she did all of it carrying something that no camera ever captured: the memory of a father, taken far too soon. The example of a mother who simply refused to break. The understanding, earned early and at great cost, that life does not owe you anything, but that it does not have to define you either. Savannah Guthrie chose, every single day of her career, to show up. Not because it was easy, not because she wasn't afraid, not because she didn't have moments of doubt, so heavy she could barely move through them. She showed up because Nancy showed her that showing up quietly, consistently, without fanfare, is the most powerful thing any human being can do. And maybe that is the message that landed so hard when that footage finally surfaced. Because in a world overflowing with curated perfection and manufactured emotion, in a world where everyone is performing some version of themselves for some kind of audience, watching a woman simply, completely, vulnerably love her mother broke through every wall. It reminded us what is real. It reminded us what? It reminded us that behind every person we admire, behind every polished performance and celebrated career and decorated life, there is almost always a quieter story, a harder story, a story that never made a single headline but that quietly, invisibly, built absolutely everything. For Savannah Guthrie, that story is Nancy. And now, finally, the world knows it.